I think it's probably very appropriate that we talk about pilot fatigue in the coveted after lunch spot, so it's good to have you back from lunch and ready to join us here. You know, as pilots, we like to talk in code, and actually we use quite a few numerous acronyms, if you will. It's just part of our culture. However, when acronyms are similar, there can be confusion and often even misunderstanding. To some degree, that's what's happened with FRMP, Fatigue Risk Management Plans, and also with FRMS, which is Fatigue Risk Management Systems. These two acronyms are very similar, but describe two completely different programs, although they are both designed to address pilot fatigue. I've had, on several occasions, heard pilots describing the FRMP at their airline, but calling it an FRMS. So if you're not confused enough yet, we're going to help you work through, because today we're going to discuss the differences between the two programs and provide some detail about FRMP, since all carriers are now required to have a program in effect, while FRMS is out on the horizon. FRMP is mandated by law, and every Part 121 air carrier, domestic, flag, and cargo, has an FRMP. As you will soon hear, an FRMP is required by the Airline Safety and FAA Extension Act of 2010, which was signed into law on August 1st, 2010. The FRMP is an air carrier generated plan that outlines their policies and procedures for reducing the potential effects of day-to-day flight crew member fatigue and improving flight crew member alertness. These plans are submitted to the FAA for review and approval. Upon approval, the carrier is issued an OpSpec A317, which requires that the plan be updated every 24 months. Each carrier's FRMP is tailored to their particular operation, so these plans, while having the same essential elements, are different and administered differently. While FRMP is mandatory, FRMS is an optional fatigue mitigation tool that's designed to be used with specific flights, pairings, possibly even full monthly or quarterly schedules. And it's part of the new Part 117 flight time rules. FRMS is a data-driven, scientifically based process that allows for continuous monitoring of fatigue-related safety risks. FRMS has greater requirements than an FRMP, and one of these additional requirements is to gather information from pilots so it can be scientifically validated and applied to a specific pairing, for example. Our panelists today will inform us about the essential elements of an FRMP, how it is approved and implemented, how it is updated, how it's administered, and how pilots can utilize the program. You'll also hear about some key differences between FRMP and FRMS as well. So let's get started with the introductions of our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dale Roberts. Dale is an aviation safety inspector, and he is the individual at the FAA responsible for approving and monitoring FRMPs. Some of you are most likely remember Dale. He was a captain and a former MEC chairman at Gemini Airlines. So Dale definitely understands both the issues of fatigue and also from the pilot viewpoint. Next to Dale, to his left, is Dr. Thomas Nesthus, a research psychologist at the FAA Civil Aerospace Medical Institute in Oklahoma City. And at the end of the table before you is Captain Jim Mangie, Pilot Fatigue Program Director at Delta Airlines, who implemented and administers the FRMP at Delta. We're going to have time at the end of this particular module for some questions after the presentation. And actually, I encourage you not to be shy, not that we've ever really had that problem with a pilot audience. Your questions and the questions that we can bring forward for the panel are really an integral part of this portion of today's program. So let's get started first, and actually kind of a tag team presentation. We'll start off with Dale Roberts and Tom Nesthus. Dale, Tom?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you with regard to fatigue risk management plans. Okay, the FRMP initiated HR 5900, which then became Public Law 111-216. Specifically, it's Public Law 111-216, Section 212B, Paragraph B. And it requires that all Part 121 carriers, regardless of whether it's passenger carrying or cargo, must have a fatigue risk management plan. The carrier is required to comply with that fatigue risk management plan. They are required at a minimum to update every 24 calendar months. And again, they must comply with that, with the FAA approved fatigue risk management plan. The background on this, we issued FAA Notice 8900.103. That was on August 12th, 2010. And then we issued, or actually introduced, the fatigue risk management plan through Info 10013. And then all of the guidance for the development of the fatigue risk management plan was found in Info 10017 and 10017 supplement, which was basically a checklist that I developed for the carrier to follow when they develop their fatigue risk management plan. It also provides them with a guidance, but it also eventually becomes their compliance statement. So it makes it easier as far as inspections are concerned. The objectives of the fatigue risk management plans are to manage and mitigate day-to-day flight crew member fatigue within, and this is important, within a regulatory structure. It also requires a fatigue education and awareness training program, because obviously if we don't know what fatigue is, we don't know the symptoms, we don't know that we are actually encountering fatigue. Its purpose is to improve alertness and also reduce flight crew member performance issues or errors. We also develop, implement fatigue management policies, procedures, and processes within the air carrier's operation. And overall, the fatigue risk management plan must have a means by which to evaluate the effectiveness of that.
Okay, since we're going to be tag teaming this between Dale and I'm going to lead off with the first couple of elements here in this FRMP structure, and then Dale will take over a few more, and I'll take some of the remaining elements. So let's go ahead and start off with senior level management commitment. A vital component of every FRMP is of course the acknowledgement from the senior level management that there is a concerted commitment to manage and mitigate fatigue during their day-to-day operations. A signed letter is required and serves as a means to achieve a corporate buy-in among all employees directly responsible for the safety of flight issues. And of course this involves flight crew members, dispatchers, individuals involved in the scheduling of flight crew members, individuals involved in operational control, and any employee providing management and oversight of those areas. So the top one here again is to incorporate a letter from the Director of Operations Level Management acknowledging their commitment to managing and mitigating fatigue and to improve flight crew alertness. It's important that the authors be members of the senior level management. They need to embrace not only the words, but institute appropriate actions when necessary, to emphasize shared responsibility among all of the participants, and to commit to an ongoing, highly visible, and involved program. Again, we talk about just culture and safety culture. It's important to establish and incorporate this within the carrier's policy. There needs to be a clear definition of both of those terms and a definition of the actions that are required in both cases. Signs and symptoms are often relevant to identifying when things aren't working properly, and obviously there's an ongoing enhancement program with any new program like this. Establish and incorporate an open communications policy for reporting fatigue-related issues. This is very critical. You need to have communications channels that go up and down and across as well. Implement the policy. Clear expectations need to be developed. Transparency is very critical. No hidden agendas from anybody in this process. And of course, defining the purpose is critical to moving forward with this. Establish and incorporate fatigue reporting system. It has to be visible, has to be simple. It serves as an early warning system. When reports come in, it may indicate that something needs to be looked into carefully and may be adjusted. That is to delineate outcomes. Corporate policy should define how an event will be evaluated for potential fatigue involvement, as well as define an overview of the methodology for conducting a detailed root cause analysis. You want to get to the bottom line to understand what's going on, where fatigue is entering the picture, and to determine what outcome measures need to be made. It has to be science-based methodology. Diverse participation is important. Communication, again, up and down and across, and the outcomes need to be action relevant. Things need to change. The corporate policy should provide for protection of privacy and methods to protect the employee from adverse actions that would discourage reports of fatigue. The air carrier will develop and implement a process for reviewing reports and actions taken to reduce flight crew fatigue exposure. It's important to incentivize this reporting requirement. If you don't take away the disincentive to disclose, then you're losing data. Data is important here. It needs to be confidential. It needs to be visible, and the corrective actions definitely need to be visible. And evaluation of outcomes is important in order to make sure things are in fact being adjusted and the system is improved. The FRMP scope, policies and procedures is the next element. The FRMP scope defines the objectives of the management plan, while the policies and procedures should be proactive, responsive, and respectively. The policy is an initiative based on a proactive objective, and the procedure is a method or means by which the objective will be met using all the available resources to the carrier. The policies and procedures, along with the education and awareness program, drive the FRMP and serve as a means to evaluate the overall outcome of the FRMP. So each element of the FRMP needs to be clearly defined, it needs to be simply stated, and it needs to be visible to everybody in the operation. The scope and objectives of the air carrier's FRMP are really written as minimum standards. There's no reason why you can't go beyond and raise the bar. This is a safety-oriented issue, and it's important that it be respected as such. And of course, you need to assure that the metrics will evolve. Eventually, you'll discover things that will adjust. You need to make adjustments, and the metrics will improve. Need to identify the kinds of operations. Info 10017 outlines these as the kind of operations being domestic flag, supplemental. Type of operations are your CDOs, night versus day ops, cargo versus passenger, and short haul, long haul, and even ULR. Another scope, policy, procedure: incorporate the carrier's policies and procedures to mitigate and manage the effects of fatigue and improve flight crew alertness. You need to specify the actions, raise visibility so everybody's aware of what's going on, track the evaluation process, And of course, this is an ongoing approach to improvement, so it needs to be monitored and evaluated periodically. Define safety objectives and expectations of the air carrier's FRMP. If you don't know what the criteria for success is, how do you know if you've met it? You need to specify those success criteria carefully. You need data. That's what defines things. Actions need to be outcome-based. And of course, you eventually establish the best practices, and there's no reason why after learning and adjusting, you can raise the bar yet again. So I'm going to turn this one over here to Dale.
Okay, one of the requirements per the statute, and when I say statute, I'm talking about Public Law 111-216, Section 212, is that the air carrier is to provide the current flight time, duty time limitations that they're observing. That would be, it can be as simple as that they are in compliance with 121 subparts Q, R, or S, or in some case, all three subparts. Or they could put in their collective bargaining agreement hours of service limitations if they so chose. Carrier must also define its rest scheme. Should be consistent, or is required to be consistent with limitations to enable fatigue mitigation strategies. It's designed to improve flight crew member alertness and reduce performance errors. It's applicable to all kinds and types of operations conducted by the carrier. And the carrier should consider rest periods required to mitigate the effects of fatigue for scheduled versus unscheduled operations, domestic, international, day versus night operations, and operations through multiple time zones. Should also consider flight crew members that are either assigned or scheduled for reserve assignments. And for carriers conducted augmented flight crew operations, there should be a rest scheme for the augmented flight crew operations to also improve flight crew member alertness. Okay, the next element is a fatigue reporting policy. And there's a couple questions. When we put this together, we put some questions. I do a lot of en route inspections. When I go out to the carriers, one of the things that I ask the flight crew is, what do you do when you have a rejected takeoff? And what policy do you follow? And they say, oh, well, we go to the GOM and follow the GOM. Okay. What do you do when you defer an item that's deferrable in accordance with the approved MEL? Well, I follow the procedure in the GOM. It's very good. What do you do when you're tired? And invariably I get this blank look. And I say, okay, your carrier has a process in place. It's called a fatigue risk management plan. So we go through and we talk about these things. Talk about, well, what we do. What does your fatigue risk management plan say as far as you being fatigued and you reporting that fatigue? Because it's important that flight crew members understand that that is data that's collectible for the carrier, and the carrier should use that data to improve the effectiveness of that FRMP. So again, how important is it to have a fatigue reporting policy? It's very important. What data can be derived from fatigue reports? We had one particular carrier that instituted their fatigue risk management plan, and within 1 month they called me and said, we just had 60 fatigue reports. And I said, yeah. And they said, we did the root cause analysis per our FRMP, and we found out that 44 of those 60 fatigue reports pointed back to one schedule. I said, okay, tell me what happened next. And they said that they went ahead and looked at it and found that it was a 2-day schedule. First day was 15-hour duty day. The second day was 14.5-hour duty day with a 9-hour and 1 minute overnight. So we can already see that problem. So well, what did you do to fix that? And they said they went back in, they reworked the schedule, found out that if they dropped the first round trip on the first day and the last round trip, and was able to bump that rest out to 9 hours and 45 minutes. I said, well, how many more fatigue reports have you had on that one? And they said, none. I said, your fatigue risk management plan worked as indicated. That's what it's supposed to do. Okay. What do I do if I don't have fatigue reports? I get this question a lot. If you don't have fatigue reports, for me, it's almost like every bell and whistle went off, because you should have fatigue reports. It's okay to have fatigue reports. It's just that when you don't have fatigue reports, or you have excessive amounts of fatigue reports, that's where we start to get very concerned. Should I ever fear reporting a fatigue event? Absolutely not. You should never, ever fear that. The carrier, obviously, they have their fatigue risk management plan and their procedures that are in place, and the company has in fact signed up that there would be no retaliation. So again, you should not fear anything about fatigue reports. And what is the FAA involvement? I get this question a lot too. Well, we don't want you guys looking at our stuff. And I have to laugh, because I explained to them that the fatigue risk management plan is developed by the carrier. What the statute says, the statute speaks directly to the carrier and says that you shall have a fatigue risk management plan, you shall comply with that fatigue risk management plan. And it's really a relationship between the carrier and the flight crew members. And that's just like a lot of other safety programs. So we get involved when we need to get involved, but as far as the FRMP, the day-to-day operation of the FRMP, our job is to make sure that you have complied with the statute. The carrier has complied with the statute. And we don't get involved per se in the reporting of fatigue events. Fatigue reporting policy is two fundamental elements. It has to have a just culture and safety culture. Without a just culture, you have no safety culture, because the people have to not worry about being singled out or pointed out for reporting a fatigue event. What's the difference between the two? Again, the just culture paves the way, and the safety culture builds your safety within the carrier. The fatigue reporting policy, develop and implement a reporting system that encourages reporting of fatigue-related events as part of the overall FRMP. The reporting system permits flight crew members and other employees to report subjective fatigue, and a means by which flight crew member can request relief from duties because of chronic fatigue. Those of you that have read Part 117, under fitness for duty, 117 section and 117.5, which states that if a flight crew member reports being fatigued, the certificate holder is required to remove that individual from their duties and obviously get the rest necessary before they come back. The fatigue reports contain valuable data, especially when you couple the information about the conditions that contributed to the fatigue as well as the work schedule for the week prior to the report. We encourage the certificate holders, when they develop their fatigue report, to look back at least 72 hours when you do have a fatigue report to try to figure out what's going on. And again, the reports, they provide a lot of data sources that can be used by the carrier to evaluate the effectiveness of the FRMP and develop the appropriate strategies. Are fatigue reports a bad thing? Absolutely not. Does the fatigue report represent a weak FRMP? No, it doesn't. Because there's other things that we have to look at besides the fatigue report. As long as I don't have any fatigue reports and my FRMP is functioning perfectly, that's absolutely incorrect. Can the data collected from the fatigue report identify other causal factors other than fatigue? Absolutely. There's a lot of information that can be gained from that. You got this one?
Okay, fatigue education and awareness training program. This is really the foundation of an FRMP. Everybody needs to be educated on the particulars. It provides employees with a level of education necessary to understand the effects of fatigue relative to the safety of flight. That last portion of that bullet is important, relative to the safety of flight. We all experience fatigue. We all have our own objective, subjective perceptions of fatigue. But when you apply it to safety of flight issues, there may be some slight differences in some things that you might need to know. It's really a foundation for the development of an FRMP policy and the procedures based on the knowledge gained through the program. As data is collected and analyzed, the elements of education and awareness program will serve as useful tools in developing and shaping policies and procedures. This is an evolutionary process, and everything is adjusted based on the data you collect. Review of the included in the educational and awareness training programs, you need to include a review of the FAA flight time, duty time, and rest regulations. Awareness of the FRMP program itself. Employees need to know, and this includes the fatigue-related policies and procedures, as well as the responsibility of management and employees to mitigate and manage the effects of fatigue and improve flight crew member flight deck alertness. Based on materials that are offered in AC 120-100, there's a lot of information about fatigue and the basics of fatigue, including sleep fundamentals and circadian rhythms are included there, the causes and awareness of fatigue, the effects of operating through multiple time zones, the effects of fatigue relative to pilot performance, fatigue countermeasures, prevention and mitigation, very important. To follow on with the list, the influence of lifestyle, including nutrition, exercise, family life. It's very important to be educating individuals that it's a complex equation here, and there's a lot of influences that contribute to fatigue. Familiarity with sleep disorders. This is something that's very common these days, or at least the awareness of this is becoming more common, and successful diagnosis and treatment is very, very important. We see the effects when treatment is not successful. The effects of fatigue as a result of commuting, pilot responsibility for ensuring adequate rest and fitness for duty, operational procedures to follow when one identifies or suspects fatigue risk in oneself or others, incorporate lessons learned regarding the effects of fatigue, and mitigation initiatives relative to the air carrier's operations. And also then to use a methodology that continually assesses the effectiveness of the training program, because it will evolve as you learn more and more about it within your carrier. Okay, the next element is the fatigue incident reporting process. This is to be used when a carrier encounters an incident, accident, or pilot deviation where fatigue is suspected or could be a causal or contributing factor. The air carrier's fatigue incident reporting process should outline how the air carrier will handle the incident and accidents, and what will happen with regards to when fatigue has been suspected of entering into this equation. Should also provide a clear path as to how the air carrier will collect, act upon the data received from these reports. Remember, science-based, data-based, you need to collect these reports and process them carefully. The data is really key resource for determining the root cause analysis of a fatigue occurrence. The output from this data collection will be vital in evaluating the overall effectiveness of the FRMP. It helps drive changes to the existing policies and procedures. It also affects change to the flight duty rest schemes, as well as driving the educational program, as mentioned previously. And Dale is going to be talking about the system of monitoring flight crew fatigue.
Okay, the FRMP also must have a system for monitoring flight crew member fatigue. Items that we're looking at are going to be schedules leading up to the fatigue event, actions that the employee took as far as getting rest, subjective and objective evidence of fatigue, environmental conditions that may have contributed to the fatigue event, relevant health or medical conditions, and communications prior to and during the event. Corporate policy should define how the event is evaluated and for potential fatigue involvement, as well as defining the methodology used for conducting a detailed root cause analysis. It also should incorporate operational procedures to follow when one identifies or suspects fatigue in oneself or in others. The FRMP also requires that there have a means by which to evaluate its performance. Carrier must develop and implement a systematic process for evaluating the effectiveness of the air carrier's FRMP, develop and implement a use of methodology for continually assessing the effectiveness of the FRMP, and develop and implement a process for determining the need for making changes to the FRMP as appropriate when it's determined that the FRMP policies and procedures are no longer effective in managing that fatigue events. When you evaluate the FRMP performance, you want to review and evaluate the FRMP policies and procedures for its effectiveness, have a process in place for determining the need for amendments to the air carrier's FRMP, policy and procedure for amending the FRMP, and should have multiple methods for evaluating the FRMP's effectiveness and performance. Some of those items are going to be data sources, which would include fatigue reports, crew surveys, methods for monitoring fatigue incident reports, delayed report usage, training reports and training program results, and scheduling issues. Another means is to use scheduling buffers, use the use of reserve members, because that's kind of a telltale when there's some scheduling issues, when you start seeing large usage of reserve flight crew members. There is potential that you may have some fatigue issues there. Look at the number of days off, the ASAP reports and reviews, and other fatigue studies. Okay, in summary, we're going to talk about the FRMP versus an FRMS. The FRMP, again, is required by each Part 121 air carrier. Functions within the regulatory structure. It's applied to daily operations. It's an active system, a reactive system, and a responsive system. And it's continually evaluated for effectiveness. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about the FRMS. The FRMS, the authority for the FRMS is found in 117, section 117.7. It is an optional fatigue mitigation approach. The FRMS, unlike the FRMP, operates outside of the regulatory structure, whereas we talked about earlier, the FRMP operates within that regulatory structure. Unlike the FRMP, the FRMS is used for a specific application. And I'll give you a couple examples. An air carrier found that they needed a longer flight duty period, so they applied the FRMS to that. They may want to exceed it by 3 or 4 hours. They're going to have to go out and collect data. They're going to have to analyze that data, and the FAA is going to have to validate that data along with the air carrier developing procedures. That's the absolute bare minimum, because we need to validate that their alternative method of compliance is as safe, if not safer, than the current rule. Again, that's one of the big differences between the FRMS, again, is an optional approach, whereas the FRMP is required by each air carrier. It is an active system, a proactive system. It's responsive, predictive. It's driven by data, uses modeling, requires validation, and the application is continuously evaluated for effectiveness. And that's it.
All right. Thanks, Dale. Appreciate, as you can see, and Dale and Tom for your presentation there, as you can see, an FRMP is a fairly detailed product that is now required by the air carriers, and really kind of reviewing through, you see that the flow through an outline of the specific pieces of who needs to be involved, how it gets set up, how do you report, how do you educate, how do you do a wide variety of these things, and how, what you do with the data in terms of an FRMP. And we can talk a little bit more through question and answers on how it relates to an FRMS. But now that you have an idea of what is required of the air carriers, let's take a look at how an operator would then go implement, set up and implement and administer on a daily basis an FRMP. And to do that for us, I'd like to turn the floor over to Captain Jim Mangie from Delta to describe how his and some other plans have been put together in the industry. Jim?
Thanks, Don. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here with you today. We listened to my colleagues at FAA talk to us about all the theory and the structure behind FRMP, and then a little bit on FRMS. And as Don said, I'd like to show you a little bit about once those things get handed to us at a carrier, and someone like me that's responsible for compliance and implementation, what these things look like in real life. So they told us both of these terms, FRMP and FRMS, similar but different. When somebody like me gets a hold of these, the first thing I ask is, now what? Well, the guidance came out in the form of an info, which is fairly standard in this day and age. For those of us in the airline world that are in the compliance arena, we know that info means you better do this or else. But this time it was a little bit different. The folks at FAA helped us out and gave us something that we as pilots and operators are very used to dealing with, and that's a checklist. And they were very clear in communicating to us what actually needs to be in this creature for us to be able to comply with it. And what that ended up doing for us as an operator was made us realize that we already do quite a bit, number one, and number two, it helped us focus our efforts to where the FAA really thought they needed to be focused. So as a good pilot and someone that's looking to not have to do any more than I really have to here, first thing I do is look and say, what do we already do? And it turns out we do a whole bunch, and so do most other carriers in the industry. We've got a working agreement, we've got a flight operations manual, we've got FARs, we've got safety documents, we've got SMS. There's a lot of things out there that are already in existence that are out there providing the types of mitigations that are already in motion. We take all those source documents, and those of us in the industry have chosen different ways to do this. For instance, this one is from my friends at FedEx. They took all of those things that they already did, analyzed the gaps that they had, and then took all that information and put it in a self-contained publication. Basically one-stop shop to take a look and gather the information from all those source documents, put it in one document, and make it public for everyone to see. At my airline, we decided that we wanted to be a little bit more elegant, and we chose to, there were a lot of different documents involved in putting this plan together. So we put them all together on a web-based document with links to all the source documents. So as all of you know from the time that we spend in computers, those blue areas there are links. And as you'll see in there, there's all kinds of different pieces of information. So as an example, the way that you get to this thing, and the way a line pilot would get to this, we communicate with our pilots at Delta via flight operations website, and there's a lot of information on this website. You search down on there, and this is a flight operations policy and procedure. Click further into it, and there we go in. Actually, this one's a little bit too high. If you need to go down a little 2 clicks more, you'll see the fatigue risk management plan, and it takes you back to that document that I showed you earlier. Now, if you look in the up in the table of contents, as an example, say for instance, I want to go in and take a look at what my airline does for flight and duty period limitations. So that's section 5 in the manual. I'm going to go up and I'm going to click on that link, and it's going to take me to section 5. And as you can see in there, there's a lot of different things that we use as flight and duty period limitations. You'll notice various sections of the FARs, as well as a pilot working agreement, advisory circular, and a few other documents. Well, I want to go further into that to take this example a little bit further, and I want to see what else. I know the FARs are out there, but what else do I have at my airline as far as contractual limitations? Do I have any, for instance, duty period limitations? Well, I go down there and I can see in the middle of that paragraph, it takes me to section 12, hours of service in my contract. I click on that and it takes me to the working agreement, and I look in there for duty limitations, and it takes me to a duty table, and it tells me what exactly my duty limitations are. One other piece in here I want to elaborate on a little bit more that Dale and Tom both mentioned earlier is there's a question out there on as far as on the line, how do I call in fatigue? Does my company have a policy? And the answer to that question is yes, everybody's company has a policy for that, or else they wouldn't have an approved FRMP. Now in ours, it's in our flight operations manual, and I would imagine in most other carriers you'll see it in the same place. But yes, every carrier has an established policy on what to do, how to call in fatigue, and what happens when you do that. Well, the next step that my colleagues at FAA mentioned is FRMS. And this is kind of a new animal here. We're inventing the wheel together around the world, actually. And so once again, as the compliance, sleep and fatigue person, I look at FRMS and I try to figure out what's next. And the first thing you're going to identify is if you do have operations that you need to go outside of flight and duty limitations for, which some carriers do and some carriers don't. Mine being a large international carrier that does a lot of diverse operations, yes, we've got a few things where the prescriptive regulations need to be a little bit more expanded for us to be able to continue on with some things. Can we fix the screen so we can flip the slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so we talk about FRMS. Once again, what am I supposed to do? Well, there's some guidance out there. The one on the left was what Dale talked about earlier, Part 117, a little bit of 121 in there, but also you'll notice that same info on the right-hand side, which was the FRMP info. And the reason I put that on up there is because the FRMP got us off to a very, very good start to putting an FRMS together. Not only did it help us identify what we do already, but it helped us get our thoughts and everything organized, and helped us put our fatigue management more towards a systemic approach rather than just a random approach like we did before we were organized. But then there's more guidance that they put out to us. They put out an advisory circular here at FAA that gives us some basics about their thoughts on FRMS and some background behind it. And soon, I hope, we'll have an appendix to this advisory circular that even gives us a little bit more information that helps us move forward. But when you start digging into it further, there's a lot more guidance out there even. The document on the left there is an implementation guide that was produced jointly by IATA, ICAO, and IFALPA in the international arena, because FRMS is a hot topic internationally as well as here in the US. And that provides some very detailed guidance material written more in international language on how to get one of these things started and moving. So the document on the right there is in draft form. Those of us that are A4A member carriers decided that we wanted to get a little bit more specific and put a US spin onto that international document, make it a little bit more understandable for those of us that haven't worked a whole lot in the international arena, and summarize things down, make it a little bit more understandable. That's in draft form right now, but we'll have that done here soon. When you go into that international implementation guide, it gives us a nice diagram that sorts it, and it's a great example of just step by step what it takes to actually pull off one of these fatigue risk management systems. When we find out, when we look through that, there's a lot of things we already do. Once again, there's our checklist back from the FRMP. Well, we know we already do that because we all have an approved program from the FAA. But we already have other things we do too, just like we talked about earlier. We've got a working agreement. That provides a tremendous amount of fatigue mitigation at most of our carriers, as well as an operations manual that has company policy in it that provides even more fatigue mitigation. Some places we might even have other things. We might have existing agreements as far as the one there on the top left is at my carrier we use for data collection. Or we might have operations that we've done some research and data gathering and reports on that will help us move ahead in the future. So there's a lot we already have. What else are we going to have to do? Well, this is an example. This is a picture of the output of a biomathematical fatigue prediction model, just one of many that are available. Modeling of some of these operations, as Dale talked about before, is going to be something that we're all going to have to take a look at to try to get an idea of where we're going to be at during these operations. We're going to have to go out and gather some data, subjective and objective data. Up on the board here, the device on the left is just a cell phone, but it's programmed with reaction time testing that helps gather performance data at different phases of flight. On the right there, there's a paper sleep log, and the wristwatch device is called an actigraph, which basically measures motion, and with help from our scientist friends, we're able to tell whether we're actually sleeping or awake at different periods, either during flights or after flights. That device spits out a result that looks like this, that we need a lot of scientific help to, looks like something your kids drew, but scientists can help us make sense of all these things and tell us where our sleep is and where we get it and where we don't. All that information is going to get put together, and I call this a safety case. I'm not sure what we're going to end up calling them in the future, but we take all of that data, all the mitigating things that we do, all of the things that we collect, and we put all that together into a safety case that focuses on that operation that we want to do, to be able to take it to Dale and Tom and to be able to prove to them using data and operational experience that what we want to do outside of prescriptive regulations is indeed a safe operation. But one of the things we do know is there's more to come. Thank you for your attention.
Dale, Tom, and Jim, thanks for the presentations, because I think it gets us to a really good spot to understand what the programs are about. Some differences, not all the differences with FRMS, but I think we can also start to see how some of these programs go together. And we now have some time, right around a little less than a half an hour or so, for some questions from you in the audience. I have a few here to get things started, but let me see if anybody's approaching a microphone and offer that up first. And it looks like gentleman right over here. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Moffitt. I'm the Executive Board President of IBT Local 357. which represents all the pilots of Republic Airways Holdings, which comprises of Republic Airlines, Chautauqua Airlines, Shuttle America Airlines, Frontier Airlines, and former ALPA Midwest Airline pilots. Currently, I'm a Embraer 170, 175 first officer at Republic Airlines based in Indy. Captain Wykoff, you said, don't be shy, so I won't. I have two questions for the panel. But before I ask the two, I'd like to give just a very brief background. What happens, we have a situation at our airlines where reassigning is very prevalent to the pilots. And there's also a corporate attendance policy which is separate from the collective bargaining agreement that we have, that basically, whether you call in sick or unavailable for reasons other than sickness, or literally a no-show because you accident, you acquire these, you accrue these occurrences, and after 8 disciplinary things up to including termination can happen. So that's the background to my two questions that I have. We do have an FRMP program in effect, as you mentioned, we all do. But what's happened lately in the last several months is our airline management, once a crew member does call in fatigued, and the pilots could provide the data to show you that, but what happens is there's been a trend of our pilots having to, once they call in fatigued, what the company is starting to do is deadhead them to their next assignment or their next base to be in position, if you will, for what happens after the fatigue call. And we don't feel that that's the intent of the rule, and if you're tired, you need to go to bed. And all it's doing is setting you up for another fatigue call down the road, because in reality, 3 hours later when you get to where you're going, you're even more tired than you were, you get the rest, etc. So my question, given that, my first question is, what is the, what can we do as pilots to raise that awareness in terms of FAA involvement? Is there anything that we can do beyond trying to explain this to our management, that where you would say you would come in? I guess, Mr. Roberts, that would be a question directed towards you and your colleague there, but is there anything we can do from a regulatory nature that would raise that awareness to the FAA?
Okay, if you believe that there's a non-compliant issue with regard to your fatigue risk management plan, you should be working with your POI and coordinating with him. And also, you can contact me as well. POI will more than likely contact me as well.
Thank you. And then my second question, which would be much shorter, is another scenario, one more specific. Our reserve pilots are assigned reserve from 3 a.m. to 3 p.m., period. That's what they have in their schedule. Trending as of late is to get the phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning or shortly thereafter and be told you're being put back in arrest, and oh, by the way, now we have an assignment for you at 3 in the afternoon or just before 3, that carries you on into the night. Again, we feel that that was something that needs to be addressed, because guys are up, ready to go, pilots are ready to go at 3 o'clock in the morning for a reserve assignment, and suddenly they're flying in the night. And I just wanted to know what your reaction to that is as well.
Well, actually, and I know this doesn't help right now because the rule is not effective until January of 2014. But that specific issue is actually answered in the new rule. And with Part 117, this is the first time where we have ever regulated reserve. And I think we captured a lot of stuff. And by the way, while we're here talking about this, I'd like to say one thing about these two guys right here. We've been working together for a long time on this, trying to get this rule through. And these guys are very, very dedicated. Both Jim and Don both are very, very dedicated in combating fatigue. But again, the question, or to your question, the current rule really doesn't address that per se, whereas the Part 117 does.
So maybe
Thank
just
you.
to be helpful with that, make a little statement, and Dale can kind of jump in and see, because what you really have here is you have a bridge of time between where you are today and your current situation, which happens at many airlines, by the way, because the systems have just never been regulated in that manner, but clearly under FAR 117 implemented will. So my view, and now Dale can correct me to 100% here, is that's what the FRMP is for here right now, is to help you bridge into that as well. So there is a responsibility to make the fatigue call when it's required, and that data needs to be collected and used inside the FRMP, and hopefully can affect some change in that particular scenario you're talking about.
Yep.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'm going to come over to the other side. Yes, sir.
Yes, Captain Rich Sampson, Piedmont Airlines, working with the safety programs not only at Piedmont but also with safety information analysis programs across all of ELPA. And that makes me a lover of safety data and safety reporting, both through ASAP and FOCA and similar programs, and very interested in the FRMP. However, I have a couple questions, and then perhaps based on your responses, the opportunity to perhaps ask a favor of you. If you're familiar, maybe yesterday with some of the conversations with Peggy Gilligan, some of our safety programs, namely FOCA and others, don't have direct pilot involvement in the review process. And so I was wondering, does the panel feel that direct line pilot participation in the review of fatigue reports is desirable or even expected? Because many of our carriers right now will use management pilots and people from the scheduling department and the safety department, and they're the ones that are reviewing the reports and making the decisions. And what they're looking for pretty much seems to be one of two options. Was pilot behavior the reason for the lack of rest issues or causing the fatigue event, or was it a company operational issue? And so what do you think about what should the composition be of these types of review groups?
So maybe I think it's a great question, and I might even expand it a little bit, because it'll go in there. So really, there's really a couple layers to this. What is, and help me out make sure I encapsulate this correctly, what's the pilot's involvement and their role and responsibility in this entire program broadly? And then is it a desired aspect, and I'd really be interested both from a regulatory and an operator's perspective, to have pilot involvement in the actual fatigue reporting review. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
So let me start off with Dale, and then I'll move, and Tom, and then I'll move to Jim for some perspective.
Well, I personally believe that there should be pilot involvement in the fatigue report, because you want that side of the information. And especially when you get into FRMS, because once you get into FRMS, you're going to have, we use an acronym FSAG, or Fatigue Safety Action Group, that will, the pilots will in fact be made up as part of that group, along with in-flight personnel and other personnel as well, which will help mold, not only mold that, but also be used as resolving fatigue reports.
Jim, how about from an operator's view?
We definitely value pilot involvement in all these processes. The challenge has been for us to make sure that the pilot involvement is also educated pilot involvement. So it's not just anybody, but it's people that we have the opportunity to bring in, and they get to learn with us all the background and the science and things like that. But yes, absolutely, it's very important to have pilot involvement in all of the fatigue issues.
Any follow-up? I think you were interested.
Yes. I am. No, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. So the unfortunate reality is, though, across, there's a significant disparity across different airlines and air carriers and how they implement this type of review process. So I'm definitely sensing from the FAA's perspective that that's what they might expect or would certainly hope for. Would that be correct, Dale?
Well, I think that's, yeah, what Dale's, if I heard it
Okay.
correctly, I'm sorry,
So-
but I think it is the expectation that is, but it sounds like it comes back to if it's not being implemented correctly, then
How do we
another
move to
conversation
make
should
that a
occur.
reality? Is there some sort of policy statement or something that we can get? This is where I'm moving towards the favor part, because a number of these airlines they're pushing back. You know, they don't see it. You know, they're afraid that, you know, if it's just an association member, that they're going to be there to defend the pilot, and that's never been, you know, our goal. Our goal is to find out the route, but to give them the understanding of what's happening on the line, because unfortunately, while I have a high respect for our flight department management in many areas, direct operational line experience that's recent, you know, is not present. So how do you think we can move to make that happen? Working together to make that happen. And I mean, between us and your office.
Dale, do you have any thoughts?
Application might be difficult, but it is one of the slides that I spoke to actually does talk about corporate policy defining how events are going to be managed and evaluated. And it talks about a science-based methodology with diverse participation and open communications, as well as you know, outcome-based actions. So I think it's very critical that those policy provisions are applied to this. And it should be part of the corporate policy.
Dale?
I'd like to say one other thing too. I do a lot of audits of the fatigue risk management plans and all the updates and all of that when they come in. And it's kind of interesting from my seat because I'm able to look at a fatigue risk management plan, the very first one that came in for a carrier. And then you see that change in that, in the policies and procedures in that FRMP. And as you go from one revision to the next revision, that you see that the carrier has got it. They understand what that thing is and how to apply it. And there's pilot involvement and, well, actually all employee group involvement. And they end up having a very strong FRMP. And that's what we're looking for. That's the objective. But it's something new. It's something new, and obviously with something new, there's going to be a lot of change that's involved. And the biggest, I think your biggest tool that you have in the toolbox is education. And getting out there and talking to the carriers, meeting with them, talking about your issues.
So just with the time remaining, you know, I think we can take a few of those off, but I think the basis of a lot of this is to encourage your dialogue and some relationship, and most importantly, communication, and realize there's a place to call also, and see how there's a path forward to best implement the plan. And I think the pilot involvement and transparency of it is very important. I hear that out of your comments there. Now it's a matter of moving forward as these things get implemented up and running. So.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Thank you
throw
very
that
much,
in.
gentlemen.
You bet. I know we have, you've lived up to the billing. We're not being shy. I love it. So we'll keep pressing through. I'll come to this side, please.
Captain Nate Hillard with Pinnacle MEC, currently on the Colgan certificate. The gentleman from Republic mentioned it earlier, but I wanted to ask specifically. Our carrier, I can't tell you where our FRMP document is, or if we have one, and I know the manuals pretty well. But I can tell you we have an attendance policy. And this attendance policy prescribes two things that are of concern to myself and to the MEC. One of which states that after 4 occurrences, and an occurrence can be a fatigue report or a sick call or a missed trip or any time you don't show up for a flight for whatever reason, that gets sent to the chief pilot for disciplinary review. It also prescribes that under certain circumstances, fatigue reports are rejected or automatically transferred to be a sick call. In fact, I just got an email this morning for a pilot that called in fatigued on his 4th stand-up overnight, and it was immediately rejected. So my question is, I'm a true believer in what you're saying, and I like the way the direction's going. However, our policies such as this, attendance policies that prescribe one size fits all, to quote an earlier group, methodology, is that legal, or is that consistent with the principles of the FRMP?
Dale, Tom?
Okay. You want to take it? Okay. First off, the statute says that the air carrier shall comply with its FAA accepted FRMP. My suggestion to you is that if you feel that there are issues with regard to the FRMP and the compliance, that you contact your POI and work with the POI on the issues. He will in turn call me, or you can call me directly if you have any questions about that. And then we'll find out exactly what's going on. But the carrier is required to comply with that.
And that's not a future requirement. That's a right now requirement.
Oh yeah, okay. Absolutely. They are required to, once they get issued OPSPEC A317, they are required. As a matter of fact, there's a statement in OPSPEC A317 which states that the fatigue risk management plan shall be available to all flight crew members, dispatchers, schedulers, persons holding operational control and management of those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Off to the right side, Hans.
I'm Kristen Brown. I'm an Air Wisconsin first officer, and I'm also the FOQA gatekeeper. Hopefully quick questions, but I just have a few. You mentioned in one of your slides that the corporate policy must provide for protection of privacy and methods to protect the employee from adverse reactions that would discourage reporting. So could you consider that you need a non-punitive program or policy?
So let me expand the question a little bit, because I like where you're going with this one, and I think it really is this. Someone tell me what just culture is, right? So why don't I ask Dale and Tom to give us their view, and then I think we'll move down to an operator's view of what just culture is and what some of the issues surrounding that. Dale?
Okay, just culture is very simply that you've established a culture where you don't have to fear going in and sitting down and talking to the company about any type of safety issue. It's not strictly fatigue alone, but it could be any safety issue that's associated with that. And in the event of a fatigue event, that individual should be able to go in and talk to the company and say, "This is what happened. We think it's maybe attributable to the schedule or whatever the circumstances is." The company will in turn follow their processes and arrive at a cause. Because again, without the just culture, you don't have the safety culture.
Did that answer the question? The basic part, Jim?
Basically, I wanted to know if you would use the actual word non-punitive as well.
Non-punitive. Well, to be very, very blunt with you, when I originally developed the guidance, it did say non-punitive. But unfortunately, the law doesn't allow me to do that. And so, because I didn't have the authority in the statutory requirement.
Jim, how about an operator's view on that?
I agree with everything that Dale said here and that Don said earlier. We as a company, as an operator, have a responsibility to be open to gathering that information, and not only gathering it, but taking it and analyzing it and doing something with it. Now, that being said, we have to be very careful on when you talk about non-punitive, because sometimes as pilots, we mix up punitive with pay. And punitive and pay are two different things. And I'll give you an example. When a pilot fatigues out of a trip at my airline, we feel like that we have constructed all of the trips within the FARs and within the working agreement, and we've provided enough buffering and the schedules and time off and opportunity and everything else, for the most part. We goof every once in a while, but we provide enough opportunity for all of us as pilots to be able to prepare ourselves properly to go out and fly the duty that we're scheduled for that day, or for a little bit more that we're expected to do. Now, when somebody calls in fatigued, that means that our system broke. And me, as a management pilot, I have a duty of care to go in and to find out what broke. And that means that maybe I need to talk to you as a pilot that fatigued out and find out what happened. And that's not punitive, that's fixing the problem. And there might be situations at certain airlines where a pilot fatigues out and they don't get paid. That's not punitive either. Those are all company policy things that need to be taken care of in due time, and those all happen at different airlines. So we have to be very careful to try to keep the industrial out of the safety and operational issues, and it gets tough sometimes.
Does your airline pay pilots when they call in fatigued?
It depends.
It's fair.
I'll help with the answer. I've called in fatigued twice and I've been paid twice.
Fair enough. Well, that was my next question, was do you consider losing pay non-punitive or more of an industrial? And that was more towards the FAA because I assumed the latter. But I guess, do you consider losing pay non-punitive, or punitive, I should say, on the FAA side?
I don't consider a situation that the pay for a certain situation being paid or not paid is punitive, and we're very careful at my company to try to keep that. Punitive is a very defined term. It's very definite action that's taken against an individual for doing something. That, when an individual legitimately calls in fatigued, is inappropriate.
Yeah, I guess I throw in the non-punitive word in there, but protecting the employee from adverse reactions that will discourage reporting. Do you feel like losing pay does that?
It's a challenge to the issue. It's definitely a challenge because of the pay implications, and because people are concerned about pay, as they should be, as I am as well. Sometimes we don't necessarily get the desired actions that we would like to have, and it's a tough issue to work through.
It's a real, just to jump in and help out, where you're going is whether you view it as punitive or non-punitive. If we really break it down, and Dale and I have talked about this several times, and as well, we all discussed it a lot in the rulemaking committee, is this basic notion of it's not a matter if it's punitive or non-punitive. And when it comes to that side, it's just that the regulations really talk about, are you fit for duty at the time? Now, there's a lot of things that go in, and at the end of the day, when we probably look at a fitness for duty issue, if it's really kind of gross, if you will, there's probably plenty to blame to run around, and I think that's where, depending on the company, is how they handle it. But at the end of the day, another statement for Dale to evaluate, if you think about what the regulator wants, they want pilots that are rested and fit for duty when it's pushback time. Now, if we don't have that, something needs to change, and now it becomes a difference, just like the difference in hourly pay rates and work rules. How do you handle that inside of your company? So that's, for these guys to evaluate if that's a fair statement or not, it's very difficult, because what it ultimately does is it can mask a problem. Because if the path of least resistance is just to call in sick, I don't get to know whether it was fatigue related or not. And I think that's always going to be a factor for us moving forward. And it may be one of the most difficult pieces here moving forward, because there's all the different contracts and industrial implications that are overlying a fundamental safety piece that we're trying to get to. Dale?
And I'd just like to add one thing. We have to have the authority to act. And while we have the authority to act as far as air safety is concerned, specifically, if we don't have the authority to say that about a pay issue, then we really can't get involved in that.
Right. No, I was more curious of your personal opinions, but thank you very much for your information.
Thanks. It was good. Actually, it was a question I was going to ask if the crowd was too bashful, so I appreciate it. But you're not. I only have time for one more, so first at the microphone over here, please.
Thanks, Captain Wykoff. Captain Mangie, being a Delta Airlines pilot, I appreciate the work that you've done at our airline, and I back up what Captain Wykoff says, that if a fatigue call happens, I know out on our line, we know that we'll be handled well and taken care of. So I appreciate your efforts inside of our flight operations structure.
Thanks,
My
Steve.
question being is, as a 767 long-haul pilot, crew rest facilities factor into a fatigue equation. And is there studies being done or discussions on the type of crew rest facilities? You go to a restaurant and people don't like to be seated next to the kitchen or the bathroom, but yet in some airplanes, that's where we're supposed to get our rest rather than a downstairs bunk area. Is there a fatigue study being looked at, long-haul pilots, whether they're in a Type 1 facility or a Type 3 facility?
There's one major study that we've all used here in the last couple of years that's really helped us get started. It's really the only significant science that's out there right now, Steve. We've got different carriers that are doing different data collection efforts right now at the individual carriers. That's helping us gather data on those particular rest facilities on those particular airplanes. But no, there is not one right now that is just universally looking at the quality of facilities or to update the one that we use, the TNO study that we used for the FAR 117.
Thanks, Steve. So we've come to the end of the time, and as you can see, there was a lot more interest in the entire topic. So what I would really encourage each of you to do is I think that you'll find the greatest path to success in kind of closing this and turning it back over to Chuck here in the next minute or so is I would really encourage you to have a dialogue. I would really encourage you to develop the relationships not only with your operational partner, whether it be somebody in the pilot group, if you're a flight operations leader, or if you're one of the pilots doing a lot of great union work out there, get to know not only your flight operations personnel that are managing these and implementing, administrating them daily, but also get to know the regulator that's involved. Because with the three of you sit down in a room, I think you'll find, and it's been proven successful in many of our other programs, that when all the stakeholders are together, we really can get good things done, and you can burn through a lot of the differences and overall make the system less fatiguing, understand each other's problems, and come to good solutions. So I really encourage you to do that. I appreciate your interest here with the panel. I'd like to thank Dale, Tom, and Jim for joining us, and hope you have a very good remainder of the forum, and I'd like to turn it back over to Chuck at this time. Thank you very much.